When the police arrived, the father was already in handcuffs. The two children were wrapped tightly in their mother's arms. And the dog? He just lay there, unmoving, unwavering. The father had taken the children deep into the woods and never came back. No one thought a powerful businessman could do something like that. But on one cold morning, he drove into the forest deep and silent and abandoned two souls, just 4 years old, in the heart of the wild. No food, no water, no explanation, only tears, trembling hands, and the wind howling through the cold, brittle trees. Then, from the underbrush, a shadow emerged, 4-legged, still, not a wolf, not a predator. It was a German shepherd, eyes deep as if they'd seen war, eyes that had walked through fire. His name was Bastion, and he didn't just save the children, he became the destiny of an entire family. That morning, the sky was strangely gray, the clouds hung low, heavy, as if hiding something. On the gravel road, leading out from the back gate of the Mendoza estate, the sound of tires grinding on cold stone echoed in an eerily silent air. A sleek black SUV came to a stop, its engine humming steadily, but no one from the mansion dared approach. From inside, Alonzo Mendoza stepped out, his gray suit immaculate, leather shoes untouched by a speck of dust. His face was devoid of emotion, as if heading to a meeting, not dropping off his children. His tall frame and cold demeanor made even the driver lower his head, not daring to ask a single question. Moments later, the twin boys, Tiago and Matias, just 4 years old, were led out by the nanny from a hallway in the back. Both wore matching navy blue fur-lined coats, hands stuffed in pockets, eyes vacant like kids being taken for a medical checkup. Matias clung to the hem of Tiago's coat, his habit when he felt uneasy. Tiago, the braver one, squinted up at their father, who was leaning down to open the car door. No hugs, no soothing words. Alonso simply gave a curt nod. "Get in!" His voice was dry-like, an order to subordinates. The SUV roared to life and rolled through the gate. Behind them, the mansion loomed like a palace, but inside the boys, there was only a hollow space where a father's love should have been. Wind seeped through the car's windows. Alonzo said nothing the entire drive, only the dry, metallic tick of his wristwatch and the occasional glance at it as though timing something important. Matias whispered, "Where do you think he's taking us?" Tiago shook his head. "Don't know. Maybe the park, or Mom?" Since birth, they had only known their mother through a few old photos hidden in a wooden box in the kitchen, kept by Maria, the elderly housekeeper. They were never allowed to call Lucia Mom in front of Alonzo. Every time they slipped up, they were locked in a room until the crying stopped. Tiago stared out the window. The mansions faded into scattered trees. Deep red leaves swayed in the wind like hands waving goodbye. In his small mind, something felt wrong. Alonzo sat motionless. His eyes were on the road, but his mind drifted to the past, a past he never shared with anyone. Lucia Ramirez had once been a maid in his household from a peaceful village. She was gentle, hard-working, and most unsettling of all, not afraid of Alonzo's gaze. One stormy night years ago, he let his guard down. When Lucia became pregnant, everything turned into a threat. The relationship ended. Lucia was silently dismissed, and the children were raised in secret as if they had never existed. And now Alonso was about to return them to that state, non-existent. "Are we almost there, Papa?" Matthias asked quietly, voice trembling. Alonso didn't answer. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Two bright blue eyes stared back at him, eyes that looked hauntingly like Lucia's. That stare made him feel weak, and Alonso Mendoza did not tolerate weakness. The SUV turned onto a narrow dirt road winding into a dense forest. The trees grew thicker, and sunlight no longer broke through the canopy. The path seemed to swallow the car whole. When the car stopped, the boys exchanged puzzled looks. In front of them was an endless stretch of trees. No park, no rides, no one but the wind and the dying hum of the engine. Alonso stepped out, circled to the back, and opened the door. Without bending down, he said, "Out! Stand here!" Tiago still held out hope. "Papa, where is this? Is there a game?" Alonso avoided their eyes. He slammed the door shut, opened the front, got in. "Wait here. I'm getting a surprise." The SUV slowly reversed, turned, and accelerated into a cloud of red dust. No one looked back. In the middle of the forest, the two 4-year-olds stood frozen. Matthias began to cry, tears soaking the collar of his coat. Tiago said nothing. He simply tightened his grip on his brother's hand, trying to stay upright. His little heart clenched. They had just been left behind. The wind howled through the trees. The scent of damp earth and rotting leaves filled the air. The sun climbed higher, but it brought no warmth to their bare feet on cold gravel. Suddenly, a faint sound rustled from behind the bushes. Matthias flinched. Tiago pulled him behind, eyes scanning the source of the noise. A shadow stepped out, silent, calm. Not a wolf, not a predator. It was a large German shepherd, gray-black coat, intelligent eyes that carried no menace, no fear, only an eerie calm. The boys froze. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark, just stared. In the dappled light breaking through the canopy, the metal tag around its neck glinted faintly with an inscription, K9, BASTIÓN. Tiago squinted and slowly sounded out each letter. Ba-sti-on? A strange name, and yet it made him feel strangely safe. Bastion didn't move. He just watched, as if waiting for a signal. Tiago hesitated, then took a half-step forward. The air between the boy and the dog was taut like a tightrope stretched across a canyon. Bastion's amber eyes followed every motion, but he stayed rooted in place. In the sunlight filtering through the leaves, his gaze shimmered, a pale amber glow, deep and quiet, like the eyes of someone who had seen too much. He wasn't a wild animal. He was a soul. Tiago stood still, then slowly sat down. His eyes never left the dog. "Are you a friend?" he whispered, barely more than a breath on the wind. Bastion didn't answer, of course, but he stepped forward. That small motion made Matthias cry out and shrink back. "Don't come close, don't!" Tiago turned, placed a hand gently on his brother's head, and stroked it. "Don't be scared. He's not barking. He's not biting. Look at his eyes. They look like someone who's sad." Matthias looked up, following his brother's gaze, and for the first time he stopped crying. He saw it too. Eyes that didn't threaten, didn't glare, but listened. Bastion stopped about 3 meters away. He lay down, resting his head gently on his front paws. His eyes never left the children. He didn't advance. He didn't retreat. He didn't force anything. He simply stayed, as if offering a silent vow. "I will not leave you. I will not hurt you, but I will not let you be alone." The children said nothing more. They didn't run. They just looked at each other, then back at Bastion. The forest didn't feel quite so terrifying now. The sky was still gray. The leaves still fell, but the quiet presence of this strange creature had changed everything. Matthias leaned his head against his brother's shoulder. Maybe he saw we were left behind, so he came to help. Tiago gave a small nod, lips pressed tight. He didn't know why a police dog had appeared in the middle of the woods, but right now he needed to believe that they hadn't been entirely forgotten. And the dog, without speaking a single word, was saying, "I'm here." As the shadows of dusk slowly receded from the forest floor and the sky faded into a pale shade of ash gray, the woods fell into an eerie silence. No more birdsong, no more rustling wind, only the soft rustle of dry leaves brushing together, and the quiet thudding of small fragile hearts beating beneath the bark of an old fallen tree. Matthias had fallen asleep, exhausted after crying for so long. His small head rested on Tiago's shoulder. Tiago remained awake, his young eyes wide open, unblinking. The trees cast long shadows in the dying light, stretching across the ground like gnarled arms reaching out. On the edge of the clearing, Bastion still lay unmoving. That large body was covered in thick fur, yet it didn't bristle. His eyes stayed half open, quietly watching. The wind had grown colder. Tiago pulled his brother's thin coat tighter around him, suppressing his own shivers. A sudden gust slapped his face, making him flinch. Matthias stirred, shivering. "I'm cold, so cold." Tiago bit his lip. He didn't know what to do, except pull the backpack under Matthias's head like a pillow and wrap his arms tighter around him, as if his small body could shield them both from the forest's chill. But the truth was, they were both trembling. Then a soft sound stirred behind them, not sudden, not threatening, more like a breath. Tiago turned. Bastion was approaching. Each step was slow, deliberate, no rush, no intrusion. His gaze was the same, deep and calm. But this time, something else lingered, something closer, as if he had made a quiet decision. He stopped less than a meter from the children, then slowly lay down. No words, no demands, no touch, just presence, silent. The wind kept blowing, but it no longer cut as sharply because Bastion was now shielding the children. That massive body became a living wall, a silent, steady shield. Matthias looked up. "Brother, what's the dog doing?" Tiago whispered. "He's guarding us." Matthias blinked, confused, then slowly let himself sink beside the dog, resting his head gently on Bastion's forelegs. No reaction. No growl. Bastion only tilted his head, glanced at the boy, then closed his eyes. A strange quiet settled over them. Night in the forest falls fast. The air turned icy. There was no fire, no blanket, no one calling their names. But something remained quieter than anything else: Bastion's warmth. The dog's body radiated a steady heat, not burning, but enough to soothe the chill creeping through little bones. Matthias drifted into sleep again. This time, no tears, no nightmares. Tiago saw it, and his eyes stung, but not from fear. No, for the first time all day he felt protected. The wind lulled the trees. Branches clicked softly against one another. Bastion's steady breath filled the silence. And every now and then, Tiago's tiny sniffling quiet, choked, but no longer hopeless. That night, a 4-year-old boy laid his head against the massive, soft, but steady back of a creature once trained for blood-soaked battlefields, now the silent protector of 2 forsaken children. Somewhere, deep in Bastion's fading memories, images stirred explosions, screams, the stench of gunpowder, and clipped military commands. But tonight, no orders came. No one told him to do this. He simply knew he had to, as if it was written into his very DNA that someday he'd use his body heat to shield something far more fragile than life itself. And so the night passed. No one called their names. No one cried out loud. Only a dog blocking the wind, half-closed eyes, a steady breath, and two children curled beside him, as if wrapped in the arms of some unseen mother one who just happened to walk on four legs. Above them, the moon broke free from a passing cloud, casting a faint glow across the clearing. Their shadows fell across the grass, a still black and white portrait of life, a tiny family no shared blood, not even the same species, but held together by the one thing no one could take away, the instinct to protect. The sun had barely begun to part the morning fog when old Domingo rose. That was his habit, like all forest folk, before the roosters crow, before the leaves fell. He'd pull on his worn boots and sling a bamboo basket over his shoulder. He lived nearly 50 minutes on foot from the nearest village, among thinning trees and a small garden he tended himself. Some called him eccentric. Some said he was a former soldier. Others whispered he was once rich and gave it all up to live alone. But no one really knew. Domingo had only himself, and memories no one cared to hear. This morning he planned to tend the garden, a small patch near the old dirt road that had been abandoned for over 10 years. He grabbed his hoe, a pouch of seeds, and a few pieces of aged sugar cane before heading out. Dew clung to his weathered coat, catching the weak light of dawn. As he stepped past a large clump of bamboo toward the open field, something made him stop. Tiny footprints marked the dewy ground, not from animals, not playful children, human and very small. His brow furrowed. No one came out here. The forest was too deep, too quiet. No houses nearby. He stepped closer, and there they were. Two small blue backpacks, soaked from the night's dew, lying by the roots of a massive tree, and next to them, a large German shepherd lying against the wind. Bastion didn't move as Domingo appeared. No bark, no growl, no lunge. He just looked, and that look stopped the old man cold. It wasn't the stare of a wild animal, not of a guardian either. It was the look of someone who knew, a silent gatekeeper. Domingo tightened his grip on the basket. His heart thudded. Only after a long beat did he see beside the dog 2 sleeping children. They lay curled together, deep in slumber. Their faces were smudged, clothes dirty and damp. One clung to the dog's leg like a pillow, and the dog still unmoving like stone. Domingo slowly knelt, careful not to make a sound. He looked closely. They couldn't be older than 4 or 5. No visible injuries, but something shattered behind their closed eyes. "My God, where did you little ones come from, out here in the forest?" he whispered. The dog lifted his head, still silent, still unmoved. Domingo reached into his basket, slowly pulling out a stick, cautiously offering it forward, eyes locked with Bastion's. Where did you come from, huh?" Then he saw the silver tag catch the morning light. K9. Bastion Domingo's eyes widened. Memories surged back like floodwaters. He remembered, nearly 10 years ago, seeing this dog on the national news, a hostage rescue in the northern mountains. Bastion, the legendary K9 unit known for mine detection and guarding soldiers in danger zones. But after a blast killed his handler, Bastion vanished. No one found him. "My God, it's really you, boy?" he murmured, voice cracking. Just then Tiago stirred. His tired eyes opened slowly, staring at the unfamiliar face. "Who are you?" he asked softly. Domingo didn't answer at once. His eyes softened, his voice gentle. "I'm Domingo. It's okay, little one. You don't have to be afraid." Matias heard the voice and lifted his head, lips trembling. "Papa left us. We only have the dog now." Domingo felt something tighten around his chest. He stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Tiago's shoulder. "I'll take you home. You have me now, and this extraordinary dog." He didn't say it to comfort them. He meant it. A promise spoken by a man who had once lost everything, now finding a reason to begin again. Bastion didn't resist. He simply stood, gave his coat a shake, and walked behind the children, as if saying, "This old man can be trusted." Domingo watched as the three small figures moved toward his wooden cabin, deep within the forest. The wind blew again, the leaves swirled. But he knew the world had changed from that moment on. That dog was no ordinary dog, and those children were no longer abandoned souls. The fireplace in the wooden cabin crackled steadily, its glow casting warm flickers across Domingo's weathered face. Outside the sun had risen near noon, but inside his chest an old memory had stirred like a phantom wind, threading through the folds of his mind, carrying the smell of gunpowder and battlefield screams. Bastion lay near the door, in his usual stance on guard. The two children, having finally slept soundly through the night, were still nestled deep under thick blankets. But Domingo couldn't rest, not because of worry, but because of a name, Bastion. K9, Bastion. That name, that silver tag, there was no mistaking it. 10 years ago, Domingo had served as a technical specialist during a high-risk military operation, a hostage rescue at an abandoned chemical plant hidden deep in the northern mountains. The place was rigged with explosives, the structure unstable, and the hostage takers had nothing left to lose. A suicide mission, unless they had a dog trained to detect explosives and follow orders with unwavering loyalty. They brought in the K9 unit, and among them was Bastion. The first time Domingo laid eyes on him, Bastion was still young, yet his gaze was different. No fear, no panic, just cold and deep. The eyes of a soldier who knew he might never return, and walked forward anyway. His handler was Lieutenant Ignacio Rivas, a calm, quiet man who called Bastion "my silent contract." They were inseparable. Ignacio rarely spoke. He didn't need to. One glance was enough, and Bastion understood. That day, while the squads crept toward the objective, Bastion was the first to enter the building. He sniffed out mines, signaled danger, moved like a ghost through mossy hallways and half-collapsed staircases. But on the third floor, just as they neared the hostages, something went wrong. A motion-triggered explosive, undetected, a faint beep like the final breath before silence. Boom! A deafening blast. Flash of white. The wall crumbled, and Ignacio vanished in the explosion. As the team scrambled through the rubble, all they found was Bastion, lying beside Ignacio's body, his paws torn and bloodied, still guarding. He didn't howl, he didn't cry, he just watched them carry his partner away, with a gaze so hollow it suffocated the soul. After that, Bastion refused to eat, refused to obey, responded to no one. And one night, he disappeared from base, gone, no trace. Search orders were issued, but in vain. Most assumed he died, or vanished into the forest, never to return. Domingo had been there, back then just a technician. But when he saw Bastion refuse to leave Ignacio's side, it brought tears to his eyes. Not out of pity for an animal, but because he saw in that dog a loyalty deeper than most humans would ever carry. And now, 10 years later, that same dog lay only a few steps away, warming 2 abandoned children. Domingo exhaled slowly. He stood, poured hot water into a tin cup, and approached the dog. "You're still alive? Still remember how to protect, even when the world turned its back?" Bastion didn't look at him, but his ear twitched, a sign he was listening. "He's gone, isn't he?" Domingo whispered. "Ignacio." No answer. But Bastion's eyes, though dry, remained heavy with silent mourning. Domingo knelt beside him, gently placing a hand on the dog's head. "Then now, you have someone else to protect. Those kids need you more than any order ever did." For the first time in years, Bastion closed his eyes, a slow, deliberate nod, and in Domingo's chest rose a quiet feeling, the sense of witnessing a fallen warrior step once more from the shadows to do the right thing, perhaps for the last time, but maybe the most important time. Night blanketed the forest like a heavy curtain, the breeze whistling through the wooden slats of the cabin, making the roof creak gently. In the dark, crickets chirped, leaves whispered, and the fire crackled softly. Nature's nocturnal symphony. Domingo slept, breaths slow and steady like an old man long at peace with the woods. But in the corner of the room, beneath the low window frame, one figure remained alert. Bastion. The dog lay sideways, ears perked high. Every subtle sound a snapping twig. A distant engine made his ears twitch. His muscles shifted under his coat with each quiet repositioning, never still for too long. In the dark, his eyes gleamed like twin amber stones, alive. He didn't stare at one spot. He scanned in rhythm. Front door, fireplace, left wall, floor, gap, window frame. No entry point left unchecked. Something inside him had awakened, a long-dormant instinct, now alive. He needed no command, no handler. Every cell in his body pulsed with a new mission. Not a war zone, not a battlefield, just a place where 2 tiny heartbeats needed protection. Beside him, Matias curled tighter under a blanket, his face nestled close to the dog's back. Even in sleep, he pressed closer, perhaps because something deep inside told him, next to this 4-legged guardian, nothing could hurt him. Tiago was still awake. He lay next to Bastion, eyes half open, mimicking the dog's vigil. After a moment, he whispered, "Bastion, you're keeping watch, aren't you?" No reply, but the dog's tail tapped the floor once, a silent nod. Tiago smiled faintly and inched closer, whispering like a secret, "This afternoon, when you walked behind us, I wasn't scared anymore, not because you're big, but because your eyes looked like someone who understands." He looked up at Bastion, eyes shimmering. "I think you lost someone too. That's why. You won't let anyone be left behind again." Bastion stayed still, but deep inside something shuddered. No one could see it. But at that very moment, a memory surged through his mind. Ignacio's calm face, turning one last time in the smoke. That final glance that said, "Hold the line." Then the blast. The collapse. Bastion never left his post. There had just been no one left to guard. Until now. Near midnight, a faint sound outside, maybe a squirrel, maybe a falling branch. But Bastion was up in an instant. No barking, no panic, just tightened muscles and laser-focused eyes. Tiago sat up, startled. There's something out there, isn't there? Bastion stepped towards the door, stood perfectly still, ears angled toward the noise. Minutes passed. He returned to his spot, laid down, but didn't close his eyes. The wind shifted. Cold air drifted through the cracks. Tiago tucked himself tighter against Bastion. The dog didn't look away. But again his tail tapped the floor, this time like a lullaby. Tiago fell asleep slowly, his head resting on Bastion's belly. In his dreams he and his brother walked through a field of flowers, Bastion by their side. The wind brushed past their ears, and there was no fear. That night, deep in the woods, when the world slept, one pair of eyes remained open, guarding the dreams of two children. A dog who had seen war, tasted loss, now reborn, not to fight again, but to protect what was still pure. At dawn, sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting golden specks across the creaky floor. The fire had long gone out, leaving only faint smoke rising from gray ash. The air smelled of burnt wood, dried grass, and forest mist, a scent both wild and deeply human. Domingo sat quietly at the table, one hand holding a cup of hot water, the other fidgeting with an old pocket watch whose minute hand had broken years ago. His eyes stayed fixed on the sight before him. Two boys now clean, fast asleep on a worn mattress, covered in the wool blanket he had patched last winter, and in the middle of them lay Bastion. The dog didn't move, except for a twitch of the nose when Matias turned or Tiago mumbled in his sleep. Sunlight landed on his back, outlining him in a soft halo like the weary glow of a guardian angel. Domingo closed his eyes. He was no longer just an old man in the woods, no longer an outcast. In that moment, he was a soldier again, one who had stared death in the face, lost comrades, and witnessed instincts more sacred than logic. And he knew. Bastion was never here by chance. Fate does not place a combat dog in the middle of a forgotten forest, unless something enormous had just happened. He stepped out onto the porch, lit a faded cigarette, and drew a long breath. Smoke curled into the morning light. His eyes searched the trees, back to where he had found two trembling souls, huddled next to a silent dog. On a night hope nearly died. Why were the boys there? Why hadn't anyone looked for them? And why did they flinch so violently at the word father? Yesterday, while washing Tiago's face, Domingo had asked gently, "Where's your father? Why were you in the woods?" The boy went quiet, then bit his lip. He said, "We were going out to play." Then his eyes reddened. "He told us to wait there, then he drove away and never came back." Domingo's chest clenched. It felt like being left behind in an old trench, watching comrades fall and being powerless to stop it. He turned back to the window. His gaze changed. No longer just pity. Now, suspicion. Who was this man who abandoned two children? Not a regular person. Even the poorest father wouldn't leave his kids in a forest without a trace of care. And the children? They didn't look neglected. Their clothes, though dirty, were expensive. The backpacks, designer brands, and most telling, they weren't starving. They were raised in comfort, then discarded like garbage. Domingo stepped inside, opened an old drawer, pulled out a thin notebook, and began writing. Day 1, 2 boys approx, age 4, branded clothing, no injuries, only fear. Father by testimony dropped them in forest and left. No search attempts. Dog. K9. Bastion former combat unit. Unknown reason for presence. Guards children as if assigned. He closed the notebook, looked at Bastion. "You saw it happen, didn't you? You saw him leave them, didn't you?" Bastion lifted his head, met his gaze. No growl, no bark, just eyes. But that look sent a chill down Domingo's spine. It did not deny it. Domingo rose, took the old radio transceiver from the wall. It only worked on local channels now. He pressed the button, held it, then let go. No, not yet. If he reported this, the man might hear of it if he had power, and if he was capable of abandoning his own blood. What else might he do? Domingo looked at the children, then Bastion, then at himself, in the dusty mirror. "You once held the line, didn't you? Well, now it's my turn." And at that moment, Domingo made a decision to keep them hidden, to tell no one, not until he knew the truth, who the father really was, and whether anyone else wanted the boys back, out of love or to bury something far darker. From a forgotten man in the forest, Domingo became once more what he had always been, a soldier, a sentinel, the line between what's right and what should never happen again. Valle Dorado was draped in a strange gray that morning. Heavy clouds clung above like an unwashed blanket stretched across the rooftops, casting a dull gloom over the already quiet streets with their faded red tiles. Lucia sat frozen at the breakfast table, untouched food before her, hands clenched tightly around her phone. For the 17th time, she had dialed Alonzo's number, and for the 17th time, the subscriber cannot be reached. Every unanswered call, every message left on read was like a needle driven deeper into her heart. It wasn't him she wanted to talk to. It was her children, Tiago and Matias, who were nowhere to be found, and Alonzo had been the last person to have them. She stood, pacing the cramped room, the temporary apartment she had rented after being forced out of the Mendoza estate nearly a year ago, part of a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for weekly visitation rights. There had never been love between her and Alonzo, just a moment of weakness, a chain of misjudgments, and the result, 2 children and a life orchestrated by power and money. Lucia had once been a maid. Alonzo, her employer, an imbalanced, murky relationship held together by control. And once she was no longer useful, she was sent away with a stipend and a permit to see her children once a week. But this week, Alonzo had called her, voice cold. "I'm taking the boys on a trip. You don't need to come." She hadn't even had time to ask where. He hung up. 2 days later, all contact was lost. Lucia collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Something was wrong, off, unnatural. A mother knows, even without evidence, even without reason. Her instincts surged like a shock down her spine. She grabbed her phone again, scrolled down her contacts, and found the name she knew by heart. Maria, the former head housekeeper of the Mendoza estate. Someone who had truly cared for her. Once Alonzo's right hand, and the only one who had secretly let her hold her children longer than the allotted time. She called. It rang. "Hello?" a shaky voice answered. "It's me, Lucia. Have you heard from Alonzo or about Tiago and Matias?" Silence. Then Maria's voice dropped, hesitant. "Don't call this number again. You shouldn't get involved with Mr. Alonzo anymore. Nothing good will come of it." Lucia gripped the phone tighter. "Maria, I'm begging you. I feel something is wrong. It's not like the other times. It feels like something has happened." A deep sigh on the other end, like someone torn between duty and conscience. Lucia, you're a good person, but sometimes good people shouldn't walk back into fire. Men like Alonzo don't leave trails, which is exactly why I need you. Just a hint, a clue. I'll find my sons on my knees if I have to. A pause, a shaky breath. Then, click. The call dropped. Lucia stared at the phone like it had sucked the air from her lungs. Her whole body sagged, but her eyes, after the tears had dried, shone with something fierce. The look of a mother once silenced, now refusing to be silent again. She stood, wiped her face, opened a drawer and took out a small wooden box, the one holding her old documents, photos, bank transfers, and an unsent letter addressed to her late father's friend, an old priest at San Miguel Church. Lucia grabbed the letter and slipped it into her coat. Her chest tightened, but every step from now on would be the step of a mother who had nothing left to lose. By late afternoon, the sun no longer blazed. It dipped behind the rooftops, painting the old stone walls along the path to San Miguel Church with golden hues. Lucia moved quickly but without panic, eyes sharp with worry. She clutched the crumpled letter like a ticket to the last flicker of hope that someone still believed her, that the past hadn't been fully erased by Alonzo Mendoza's influence. The chapel door creaked open. Candle wax and incense lingered in the air. At the altar, Father Francisco gently arranged white flowers before the Virgin statue. His back was more hunched now, hair snowy and hands trembling faintly. But when he turned, his eyes were still bright. Eyes that had once sheltered Lucia during her darkest days. Father Francisco. Her voice was soft, but reached him. He turned, surprised and saddened. Lucia, you've lost weight. How long has it been since you last came? She lowered her gaze, eyes wet. I have nowhere else to turn. Father, I need your help to find my children. They sat on the wooden pews to the right of the altar. Father Francisco poured her hot tea, placing it before her like a sacred ritual. His silent way of saying, I'm still here. Speak. Lucia's fists clenched slightly. They made me sign papers. Said if I stayed quiet, filed no suits, I could visit my boys once a week. But these past months, Alonzo changed. He started canceling visits, meetings, business trips, and now he's vanished with them. She choked back tears. I don't have the right to fight for them. No money, no lawyer, no one believes me. To them, I'm just the failed mother, a maid who dares to challenge Alonzo Mendoza. The priest sighed. His wrinkled hand rested on hers. You are not a failure, Lucia. You survived. You endured. But now, it's time to stand. He stood and disappeared into the back room. Moments later, he returned with a business card. I'm no expert in law, but I know someone, a girl I helped when she was an orphan. She's now a prosecutor in the Central District. Her name is Elena Vargas. She's not like the others. She doesn't fear power. Lucia's hands trembled as she took the card. But will she believe me? I have no evidence, just a terrible feeling. Father Francisco looked her in the eyes. A real mother doesn't need proof. Sometimes a single look is enough to awaken justice from its slumber. When Lucia left the church, the sunlight had vanished, but the streetlights flickered on, and in her hand that little card shone brighter than any lamp. For the first time in days, paralyzed by fear, a spark lit inside her. 8:00 p.m., the Central District Prosecutor's office. Only a few office windows glowed faintly now. where the most sensitive cases were often handled after hours in silence. Elena Vargas sat alone in her modest office, her gray blazer still crisp, posture unbent despite the long day. Before her, a slim file strangely thin, only a few handwritten notes, a printed text from an old phone, and a name, Lucia Morales. Beside it, Alonso Mendoza. Elena typed his name into the internal network. Even as a prosecutor, she had to move discreetly. This was one of the city's most delicate names. The screen lit up, not a lack of data, but a flood. Subsidiary companies, financial holdings, lobby efforts, charity galas, foster home donations, keynote speeches at fundraisers. Elena smirked. Build a saintly image first. The ones with something to hide always know how to donate. She dug deeper. Divorce record? None. Marriage license? None. The twins' birth certificates? Alonzo listed as father, but under mother left blank. She frowned and scribbled a note. Power dynamic. Indicators of information suppression. Possible concealment of abuse or misconduct. She picked up the phone and called an internal contact. Carlos, trace all properties registered under Alonso Mendoza in the past 6 months. Focus on remote estates, villas, or listings with financial activity but no legal residency. Should I flag it as official inquiry? No. Keep it under routine audit. Leave my name out of it. She leaned back. She'd seen men like Alonso, clean on paper, but ruthless in real life. They left no proof, only absence, at exactly the right places. She thought back to the woman she'd met that afternoon, Lucia's desperate eyes, voice cracking, but determined. I have no proof, just a mother's instinct. My children are in danger. Elena had hesitated, but in the lack of evidence, she believed more. Because if Alonso really had done something, the evidence would already be gone. She clicked open a news file from 2 weeks ago. Mendoza Group Board to convene. Rumors suggest Alonso Mendoza may be nominated for National Industry Federation Chairman. National level role. Political leverage. International exposure. If he's cleaning up his image, then erasing personal history makes sense. She rose and walked to the window. The city below blinked like a web of lights, and in that web, Alonso Mendoza was likely the craftiest spider. But she wasn't the fly. She was the scalpel. Silent, but precise. Back at her desk, she wrote in her notebook, if he truly hid the children, he won't leave traces. So, I'll search in what he tried to erase. Elena Vargas, daughter of a single mother, abandoned after assault. Raised in a church-run shelter. She knew all too well the silence of the system. And this time, she would not let it stay quiet. The government building was quiet that morning, just like every other day, cold hallways, spotless glass, polished suits. But Elena walked through it all without bowing her head. Because she wasn't there to represent power. She was there to speak for those who had never been allowed to speak. The children left behind in the woods, the mothers forced into silence, the dogs erased from the system because they were no longer useful. She came to speak for them, not with slogans, but with documents, evidence law, and a fearlessness carved from grief. She had once watched her own mother be denied treatment because a single stamp was missing. She had once heard the wheezing breath of foster children, not from illness, but from growing too used to no one ever coming for them. Elena understood that not all injustice is loud. Some of it hides in the quiet, turning away of a society that no longer wants to see. And so this time, when she heard Lucia's cry, when she read the hurried line in a journal about the plan before the board meeting. Elena didn't just investigate, she stood, not to bring down a businessman, but to stand for a principle. No one has the right to erase a life just because it's inconvenient to their reputation. The day Alonzo was arrested, Elena didn't look at him with triumph. She looked at Bastion, sitting silently in the rain, and nodded, slowly. No words were needed. But in her heart, she knew. This time, justice didn't serve power. It stood with the one who had no voice, but chose to do the right thing anyway. 33rd floor of El Gran Viento Hotel, one of the most discreet and expensive spots in the city center. A small conference room had been privately reserved, bypassing the front desk, with direct access from the underground parking. No one knew who was meeting there today, and no one dared to ask. Inside, Alonzo Mendoza stood with his back to the one-way glass window, the city lights behind him forming a galaxy seemingly captured in his hands. Black suit, ash-gray tie, slicked back hair, immaculately groomed. Every detail on him said one thing: I don't leave blood behind, only footprints. Seated at the walnut conference table were two men, attorney Arturo Gallardo, who had helped him quietly handle 3 previous internal complaints. Lionel, a private investigator, silent, discreet, renowned for cleaning up trash without leaving a smell. Alonzo didn't sit down. He poured himself a glass of wine, watching the swirl of liquid. Then, without preamble, I'm about to be nominated for chairman of the National Industrial Federation. Everything is on track, but I don't accept risk. And this time, the risk is the kids. Neither Arturo nor Leonel showed surprise. They were used to Alonzo referring to everything like assets quantifiable and controllable. They're no longer listed in any family records, no formal adoption paperwork. But some people might still remember they exist. I want 2 things. 1, erase every legal and civil trace of the kids. 2, monitor the mother. If she opens her mouth, I want it handled before the media catches a whiff. Arturo nodded, opening his briefcase. I can take care of the civil documentation within a week. The custody case was dismissed years ago, so a few lines can be rolled back easily. But socially, Lucia still has connections in the church. She's been in contact with a priest Francisco. Leonel added, his voice flat and still. The man's harmless. But through him, there's a possible link to a prosecutor named Elena Vargas. She's tracking property movements off the grid. It's not official yet, but it looks like she's sniffing around abandoned properties near the forest. Alonzo smirked. Women, if they don't keep quiet, they're always a variable. He placed the glass on the table. The clink was soft, but chilling. I don't want the kids found. Not dead, but invisible. So faint that even public memory can't hold on to them. Delete photos, erase school records, remove birthday posts. Clean out the memories of anyone from the estate who ever saw them, including the old housekeeper. Arturo glanced at Leonel. Maria is still local, but she's hesitant. She used to help Lucia sneak in extra time with the kids. Could be a leak. Alonzo chuckled dryly. Send a gift. If she won't take it, send a threat. If that fails, send a reminder. We don't need blood, just silence. The room fell into a brief silence. Leonel jotted notes with a plain black pen. Arturo organized his papers, eyes fixed on Alonzo. The man he knew never raised his voice, because the cruelest decisions were always weighed in calm. Before he left, Alonzo said one last thing. I don't want my name tied to scandal. I want it tied to victory, reform, and the image of a new national leader. And for that, anything imperfect needs to be wiped clean before the board meeting at the end of this month. He exited the room, his reflection faint in the glass. The wine glass remained half full, but no one dared to drink from it, because in that glass wasn't just wine. It was the scent of power and a disappearance with intent. At the Mendoza mansion, nestled within a gated residential enclave, the place still looked like a museum, silent and beautiful. But the atmosphere had shifted. Since Alonso became more reclusive, doors closed earlier and hallway lights flickered more often. Maria, the housekeeper for nearly 20 years, moved slowly along the upstairs hallway. She carried a polished silver tea tray, but her eyes were weighed down with unease. She stopped in front of a solid oak door Alonso's private office and knocked 3 times, as always. No reply. She turned the knob, it opened. Strange. The room was empty. Only the faint smell of cigars lingered, and the desk lamp still glowed. Under that light sat a dark brown leather-bound notebook, Alonso's personal journal, usually locked in the safe now open halfway. Maria froze. She'd worked too long not to understand the meaning behind such small details. The room had never been this accessible. The journal had never been left out. Her instinct told her what lay inside might save the children or seal the silence of her conscience. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the tray, quietly pulled her phone from her apron, and set it to silent. She approached the desk, flipped 2 more pages, stopped. A sharp, clean line of handwriting in black ink read, "Must be completely eliminated before board meeting. No trace left behind. The past is a burden. The future is politics." Below that, Project Aurora, RF6, with timestamps matching the days Alonso vanished with Tiago and Matias. Maria inhaled deeply, snapped 3 quick photos. She stepped back, returned everything exactly as it was, and exited the room like nothing had happened. On the way down to the kitchen, she didn't let go of the phone in her apron pocket. Her heart pounded like she was carrying explosives. One glance from the wrong person could blow it all. In the empty kitchen, Maria dropped into a chair, exhaling hard. She looked at the screen. The photos were still there, and in that moment, memories of the boys returned like a tide. Tiago, the older one, used to sneak into the pantry to stack boxes like toy blocks. Matias, the younger, had a habit of tapping her thigh lightly when he got sleepy. Once, Alonso lashed out because they spilled an expensive bottle of wine. She took the slap meant for Lucia. But that night, Matias crawled from his room into the kitchen and fell asleep in her lap. She had never been a mother, but that night her heart knew she was one without a title. Now, if she stayed silent, she'd be signing their death warrant or worse, condemning them to become ghosts in official records. Footsteps echoed above, someone walking the hallway. Maria jumped up, grabbed her phone, and stashed it under the tea cabinet beneath a lace cloth and untouched hiding spot. She pretended to wipe the table. The door opened. Lionel, the quiet man who'd appeared a few times recently, stepped in. "The boss wants to know if you entered his office." "No." Maria answered quickly, eyes steady. "Did anyone else?" "No, just brought the tea, like always." Lionel held her gaze for a second, then nodded and shut the door. Maria stood frozen, her fingers gripping the chair. Sweat beaded at her temples. She knew the game had begun, and this time She wasn't just a spectator. She glanced toward the hidden phone and whispered, "For the kids. Even if I must betray everything I've been loyal to for 20 years, I'll do it." Night fell over the forest like a thick ash-colored blanket, cloaking each tree, each drop of dew, and the small wooden cabin of Old Man Domingo. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves' soft, trembling sounds like nature's own sighs. Inside, the fireplace still flickered faintly. The lights were off, and only the orange glow of burning logs cast moving shadows on the wooden walls. 3 figures, 2 small, 1 large, slept on makeshift bedding in the living room. Mattia stirred, sweat forming on his forehead. He didn't cry, but he panted, arms flailing in his sleep. "No, don't leave us. Don't leave me." The words slipped from his lips like a broken whisper, triggering a wave of panic. He kicked off his blanket, tiny hands searching the cold air. His cheeks were flushed and damp with sweat and tears. From the corner of the room, Bastion, the German Shepherd Police dog, lifted his head. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He simply rose silently, his steps as quiet as shadows. The fur along his shoulders bristled, not from fear, but a deep-rooted vigilance honed by instinct. He approached Matthias, lowered his head. His nose gently touched the boy's shoulder, not pushing, not startling, just a soft nudge, calling him back to safety. Matthias opened his eyes, dazed between sleep and waking. He met Bastion's gaze, deep, wet, wordless. Yet somehow in those eyes there was a lullaby without sound. Bastion nudged him again, this time guiding him toward old Domingo still asleep in his chair, hand resting on Tiago's pillow. Matthias followed the nudge, curling into the man's lap. His eyes closed again, but this time no more shaking. Bastion stood watch for a while, a silent wall of protection, before curling back into his corner, but his ears never dropped. He didn't sleep. He didn't dare, because in the dark, a child's silent nightmare, that's the greatest danger, and no one but him could hear it. Domingo woke a short time later, sensing extra warmth. He looked down to find Matthias clinging to his arm, peacefully asleep. The boy's lips parted, but no longer trembled. Domingo turned his head, met Bastion's unwavering eyes from across the room. "Another nightmare," he whispered. Bastion didn't respond, just blinked once, then turned away. But in Domingo's heart, that look said everything. This dog wasn't just a protector. He was part of the night, but the only part that held light. Outside, a gentle rain had begun to fall. The wind no longer howled. It exhaled slowly, as if the forest itself had grown weary from all that had happened, as if the earth and sky wanted to breathe in rhythm with the warmth inside that little wooden house. On the roof, raindrops tapped softly, no longer the drumbeat of an oncoming storm, but something like a lullaby. Steady, tender, a song to let old wounds finally rest, a song to ease the fear that had lingered through the longest exhale of a lifetime. Lucia gently closed the window. Behind her, the 2 children slept soundly, curled up together, and Bastion, head resting beside them like a living blanket. Their breaths rose and fell as one. No one was alone now. No more trembling in the dark. She didn't call his name. She didn't need to. Because now, in this house, Bastion was no longer the strange animal from the woods. He was the invisible pillar, holding up the home and the hearts within it. The wind slipped through the leaves. Golden light spilled across the wooden floor, shimmering like Bastion's eyes whenever he watched in silence. Deep, but not sad. Quiet, but never cold, just the gaze of a soul that had once lost its way and finally found its way back home. That night no one dreamed of nightmares, only Bastien shifted in his sleep, ears twitching before settling again, not in alarm, but as if to remind himself, this dream is real, this family is real. And if someone listened closely enough, deep into the hush of the rain, they might have heard a gentle whisper, "We've weathered enough loss. Now it's time to stay." The sky had been overcast since dawn. The chill of the deep forest seeped into the skin like a silent warning. Wind threaded through the leaves, rustling the dead grass beneath moss-covered roots. A slate-gray SUV pulled over several hundred meters from the trail leading into the woods near Domingo's farm right at the GPS spot, marked on a private satellite map, invisible to any public tracking system. The car door opened. 3 men stepped out. No uniforms, no badges, just black jackets, waterproof boots, and eyes that didn't blink. The one in front, Claudio, early 40s, bald, an old military ID number faded on his forearm. Tattoo lifted a pair of binoculars and scanned the thick canopy ahead. "We're looking for 2 kids about 4 years old. Might be able to walk, might be hiding in a civilian home. And a dog. Word is it's trained." Another man puffed on a cigarette, smirking. "A dog's nothing. 1 pill and it's out. The real problem is leaving no trail." Claudio nodded. "No bodies. No blood. No clues. The closer it looks like they never existed, the better." They began to move, avoiding cameras, staying clear of neighbors' sight lines. Claudio pulled out a thermal scanner with a signal amplifier. A blinking red dot showed up northwest. "Something warm, about 2 kilometers out. Firelight last night. Animal heat signature." Meanwhile, near the wooden cabin, Bastion was doing his rounds. Ears alert, nose to the ground, each breath deepening. The wind carried a scent, foreign, not wildlife, not forest. He froze beneath an old pine, inhaling sharply. Gunpowder. Human skin laced with metal. Military boots once soaked in seawater. Danger. He turned instantly, sprinting toward the cabin. Inside, Tiago was playing with wooden blocks on the floor. Matias sat in Domingo's lap, humming a tune from an old children's song. Bastion barged in, didn't bark, but his eyes were tense. He rushed to the door, looked out, then turned back and growled low. Domingo stiffened. "You smell something, boy?" A former soldier. He didn't need words. The dog's tail and ears told him everything. Something's coming. Domingo jumped up, pulled back the curtain. Nothing in sight, but instincts screamed. If Bastion reacted like that, this wasn't random. He quickly grabbed jackets, wrapping the boys up. Bastion dashed behind the cabin to the old shed, where Domingo kept a hunting rifle, just in case of predators. The shed door creaked open. Bastion stood waiting, tail slightly wagging, not asking to play, asking to fight. Domingo loaded the gun, looked down at the dog. "If they come, you're our first shield." Bastion didn't bark, just tilted his head like he understood. And as the 2 boys huddled together behind the old man, their eyes peeked through the window. They saw the dog, standing guard, still as a living statue. Back in the woods, Claudio and his men entered the perimeter. They didn't know. What awaited wasn't just an old man and 2 kids, but a primal instinct that had once bitten through steel armor on a battlefield. Bastion, the silent warrior, was awakening again. Footsteps, soft, cushioned by damp forest floor and dried leaves, yet Bastion heard them. His ears twitched. eyes locked southwest, where the scent grew sharper. Sweat, strategy, and cold weaponry. The cabin sat quiet in the mist, like it didn't exist. But Bastion knew something was crawling toward them, not beasts, but men. And those men had one mission: take the children. Inside, Domingo whispered the boys under the table, grip tightening on the rifle. Tiago looked at him, then at Bastion standing by the door. Is he waiting for someone? Not waiting, preparing, Domingo whispered back, eyes glued to the window, a snap of a twig. A shadow moved past the edge of the forest. They were here. Claudio signaled. His team split. One circled behind the old shed. Another crept between thick trees across the path. Movement like wolves stalking prey. Bastion growled low, not loud but deep, enough for Domingo to understand. They're close. And then creak. A window latch snapped, someone picking the lock. Simultaneously, the front door handle shifted. Now, the old man breathed. At that moment, the door burst open, and Bastion launched like lightning. His roar tore through the forest like a primal scream. Claudio didn't even react in time before the 85-pound German shepherd leapt into the air. His fang sank into the arm of the second intruder, the one holding a tranquilizer. A scream echoed. The attacker collapsed. Bastion pinned him down. His teeth didn't release. His eyes blazed not from rage, but from absolute purpose. No one touches what I protect. Claudio drew a taser. Bang! The hunting rifle fired, smacking a tree trunk nearby. A deliberate warning. Back off. I once dropped a jungle viper from twice this distance. Domingo growled. The third man froze. Claudio cursed, dragging the injured partner back behind cover. Bastion stood firm, blood on his muzzle, eyes locked on the trees. Inside, Tiago clutched Matias. The younger boy trembled, while the older one panted, peeking from behind the cushions, the image of the dog bleeding but unmoved etched into their little hearts. He's not scared, Matias whispered. No, because he's got us to protect, Tiago answered, eyes shining through tears. Outside, the rain began to fall. The smell of blood, wet soil, and gunpowder thickened the air. Claudio pulled a radio, muttering, "Abort. Dog's not normal. Old man's not dumb. Report failure to Alonso." They retreated, leaving behind blood drops, boot prints, and a dog standing still in the rain like a statue carved from loyalty. The door shut. Bastion walked back inside, eyes still scanning the trees. He didn't lick the blood, didn't growl again. He lowered his head to the floor, signaling, "Safe for now." Tiago stepped forward, no prompting needed, dropped to his knees, and hugged Bastion's neck. He said nothing, just pressed his forehead to the soaked, warm fur. His tears mingled with the rain on the dog's back. Out in the woods, the scent of evil washed away with the storm. But for Bastion, the battle never really ended. Tonight, he won, and the children were still here, still whole. Rain thundered through the forest. Lightning cracked across the sky, briefly revealing trembling trees and muddy tire tracks. No one would ever know a life-or-death moment had just passed in a tiny wooden cabin among the trees. At the same time, more than 5 kilometers away, a black SUV sped through the darkness. In the front seat sat federal prosecutor Elena Varela, eyes sharp, gripping a sealed case file titled "Search and Arrest Warrant, Roberto Alonso Mendoza." Beside her, Lucia, soaked to the bone, clutched an old scarf like her last thread of hope. "You're sure it's here?" Elena asked, eyes locked on the windshield. "I trust Maria," Lucia said, voice trembling but firm. She said he plans to end it all tonight. Behind them, 2 police cars blared sirens. Red and blue lights cut through the trees, flashes of justice breaking into darkness. At the forest's edge, just as Claudio and crew vanished, a lone figure waited. Alonzo Mendoza, draped in a wool coat, hat pulled low, stood beneath a tree, watching the dim cabin lights. He spoke into a radio, voice icy. "Is it done?" "Couldn't get close. There's a dog. Not ordinary. 1 man injured." Claudio's voice crackled through rain. Alonzo clenched the wooden railing by the car. "Shut it all down. I'll handle it. They won't survive the night." He turned to leave when, "Stop right there!" A flood of headlights lit up the forest. Flashlights locked on Alonzo's face. Gun clicks echoed from the dark. Elena stepped out of the lead car, holding up the file. "Federal prosecutor, Roberto Alonzo Mendoza, you are under arrest for attempted murder, child abduction, and obstruction of justice." Alonzo froze. No protest. Just turned and in a flash of lightning saw Lucia step forward. Her hands trembled, but her eyes blazed. "You'll never touch my children again," she said. Back at the cabin, Bastien stood at the door, rain on his back, eyes unblinking. Then he lifted his head and for the first time that night barked. A single bark, loud, echoing like the final hammer of a silent verdict. Domingo turned his head, listening through the trees. He knows. It's over. Tiago and Matias crawled out from under the table, peeking through the window. Rain still fell, but in their eyes something had lit up. Outside, police handcuffed Alonzo, shoving him into the cruiser. Elena spoke quickly with her lead officer, then turned to Lucia. "We'll escort you to where the boys are safe. And trust me," she looked deep into the mother's eyes, "this time nothing can take them from your arms again." Lucia covered her mouth, overwhelmed, for the first time, after years of silence, suppression, and stolen truth. She stood backed by justice. The police vehicle turned down the trail into the forest toward where the children were waiting. Where a dog never commanded, never trained to do so, had done what humans often forget. Protect what is most fragile using every inch of body and heart. No armor was needed, no gun slung over the shoulder, no commands crackling through a radio. Bastion had only instinct and memory, and it was those 2 wild, untrained things that saved the part of humanity we're slowly losing in this world. As the car rolled gently past the pine trees, the wind bent the branches as if bowing in salute, because nature, more than anyone, understands that life, so fragile, always needs someone who won't leave when danger comes near. And Bastien chose to stay. No one filmed it. There was no ceremony, no medal awarded beneath the forest canopy, just 2 boys who had once been abandoned and 1 dog who had once been broken, touching 3 pieces that shouldn't have fit, but somehow did. Perfectly. The car stopped. The door opened. Tiago and Matias ran forward, their eyes shining as their mother swept them into her arms. But they looked back, because Bastien hadn't moved yet. He still stood beneath the shade of an old tree, watching, waiting, just like that first night in the wild. He didn't rush forward. He simply existed, quietly but completely. Then Pedro spoke. "Come home, buddy." That was all. And Bastien stepped forward, slowly, each paw crossing from an old chapter into a new one. A chapter with no commands, only love. The story could end here, but it doesn't, because one day when these children grow older, they'll tell others that long ago in a forest, a dog taught them what it means to protect without needing a reason, what it means to be loyal without expecting a reward, and what it means to be family without sharing blood, only the choice to stay. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside Lucia hadn't yet settled. The police car turned onto a narrow dirt road, its tires crunching over puddles left behind, dragging a trail of mud like a wound that had yet to scar. Lucia sat in the back seat, hands clutching the edge of her skirt. With each bend, each tree retreating in the rear view, her heart felt tighter, as if gripped by invisible hands. Will they recognize me? Will they blame me? Or have they learned to forget their mother? Elena sat beside her, saying nothing. She gently placed a hand on Lucia's shoulder, a quiet squeeze, just enough to steady her breath. Morning sunlight filtered through the leaves, pale beams shimmered on the muddy path, a fragile light, like the last hope, trying to break through. The cabin came into view, the mossy stone steps, the weathered wooden frame, and on the porch stood an old-figured Domingo. At the threshold, two small silhouettes stood hand in hand, eyes fixed forward as if waiting for something long overdue. Lucia didn't wait for the car to stop. She flung the door open and stumbled into the mud, the wind slapping her face, tears mixing with the old rain. "Mom!" The scream shattered every distance. Tiago was the first to run. Matias followed, falling once, but scrambling to his feet. Lucia opened her arms like someone shipwrecked finally reaching shore. "My babies, I'm here. I'm here." The three of them collapsed into each other in the middle of the muddy yard, as if trying to melt into one to make up for all the time lost. Tiago buried his face in her chest. "I thought you left us." Lucia sobbed, cupping their faces, lips trembling. "I never stopped loving you, never, not once." Matias said nothing. The little one gently touched her hair, like afraid she might disappear. Then slowly he pressed his cheek to hers. A soft sob escaped. None of them heard the footsteps behind them, but they all felt the warmth. Bastion. The German shepherd walked over, not barking, not pushing in. He simply sat beside them, his gaze soft, like he too had exhaled. Lucia lifted her head, locking eyes with Bastien, and in that moment she understood. She didn't just owe him. She was indebted for life, for trust. Thank you for staying when I couldn't," she whispered, voice breaking. Bastion bowed his head. No growl, no wag, just that calm, deep stare of a warrior who never asked for medals. Domingo stepped quietly behind them, laying a hand on Elena's shoulder. "I've never seen anything more like a family than this moment." Elena nodded softly, saying nothing. Lucia pulled the boys closer. Tiago turned to Bastion. "He's our hero, Mom. Did you know?" Lucia nodded, reaching to stroke Bastion's head, whispering, "And from today, he's part of our family." Above them, sunlight streamed onto the wooden porch, casting a golden light across Domingo's silver hair, Lucia's hunched shoulders, the tear-streaked cheeks of the boys, and the soaked but proud coat of the dog, named Bastion. A morning after the storm, and that family finally was whole again. The interrogation room at the mountain police station was silent. The old wall clock ticked like a heartbeat, holding its breath. A pale wooden table sat in the middle. Two small chairs borrowed from a nearby preschool had been set up so the boys could sit comfortably. Elena Varela, the federal prosecutor, sat opposite. Beside her was a young female investigator trained in working with children. No dark suits, no nameplates, just soft-colored shirts and voices that felt like lullabies. Lucia sat behind the boys, not intervening, not interrupting. Her hand rested on the chairbacks, a silent but steady presence. Tiago looked around, legs swinging, hand tightly holding Matias's. Matias sat still, eyes watching Elena cautiously. Elena opened her notebook, but didn't turn on the recorder yet. "You don't have to be afraid. I just want to hear your story. What you remember." She glanced at the dog lying under the table. "If you get tired, just hug Bastion. He's not going anywhere." Matias nodded slightly, like a child who just received a lucky charm. Then Tiago spoke, soft but clear. "That day, Dad said we were going on a trip. He put jackets on us. We even got cookies." Matias added, as if the two brothers had told this story to each other 100 times in their heads. "Then Dad told us to sit still. The car drove for a long time. When it stopped, there were no houses around." Elena took notes, voice calm. "What happened next?" Tiago squeezed his brother's hand. A pause. Then he exhaled. "Dad said he'd be back with gifts." No one spoke. We waited a long time. Then he never came back. Matias buried his face in his arms, murmuring, "We cried. We were scared. Then it got dark. No one came. Just fallen leaves and owl sounds." The room was still. Elena had stopped writing. A soft movement broke the silence. Bastion lifted his head, walked around the table, and sat beside Matias, gently resting his head on the boy's leg. Tiago stroked the dog's fur instinctively. "Bastion came when we were about to fall asleep. He laid next to us. He was warm. We thought he was an angel." Elena exchanged a glance with the child investigator, then turned on the recorder. Her voice now official and firm. "Voluntary testimony from 2 minor witnesses regarding the incident on the 17th, in which Mr. Alonso Mendoza abandoned 2 preschool-aged children in the remote forest." Then she paused and asked, "Were you scared?" Tiago tilted his head. "At first, yes, but the dog made us not scared any more." Lucia turned away, unable to hold back. Her tears fell silently. Elena nodded gently. "Do you want the dog to stay with you?" Matias answered without hesitation. "Yes, he's our hero. He's our home." Through the window, sunlight slanted across the scene. 2 small children protected by a dog sitting like a stone statue, his eyes fixed on Elena, waiting for the final verdict. Elena closed the file. "Thank you, both of you. Today, you were braver than any adult I've ever met." As the boys were led outside, everyone in the room stood not out of formality, but out of respect for 2 little witnesses who had survived and dared to tell the cruelest story with the purest voice. Bastion followed behind them, tail not wagging, just steady, measured like a silent vow. "I'll be here when they need me, when justice needs a bark at the right time." That wasn't the gaze of an animal. It was the gaze of a soul that had walked through loss, that had once stood on the edge between life and death, that had lost comrades and then lost faith in humanity, but still chose to come back, not back to the battlefield, but back to a home. The photograph hangs quietly in the living room, just above a small wooden bench where the 2 children sit each morning. One day, Matias climbed onto the bench, reached up, and gently touched the frame, whispering, as if afraid Bastion might hear, "I'll never forget you." Pedro softly added, You weren't just a police dog. You were a family. And strangely, ever since that photo went up, the house has felt a little brighter, not because of light, but because of the sense of safety that everyone quietly understands is still there. Whether Bastion lies curled on the porch or is now just a name etched into an old badge. One day we all grow old. The children will grow up, fall in love, leave home, and chase dreams of their own. But the memory of a dog who emerged from the woods, carrying warmth, loyalty, and forgiveness, will never fade. Some heroes don't need medals to be remembered. They are remembered for the quiet choices they made, like lying between two children that first night in the forest, like braving the wind, staying awake, never barking, just watching and waiting, like staying even when he could have left. And that was enough. A lifetime. A lifetime that left behind a gaze capable of love. A lifetime worthy of being framed on a wall and living forever in the hearts of those who remain. The city court convened at 9 a.m., a day without sunshine. The sky was overcast, clouds drifted aimlessly, undecided whether to pour rain or hold it for another afternoon. The courtroom gates closed behind Alonzo Mendoza. The man who once stood atop a pedestal of power now wore a cold gray suit, his hands lightly cuffed, and his eyes, stripped of pride, only emptiness remained. Inside, the murmurs of the gallery quieted as the presiding judge entered, followed by the clerk and prosecutor, Elena. On the witness bench, 3 people sat side by side, Maria, the former housekeeper, clutching a lace handkerchief. Domingo, his eyes stern, back as straight as in his soldiering days. Lucia, dressed in dark tones, hair neatly tied, her eyes no longer burning with rage, but calm. The judge struck the gavel, voice firm. The court now opens the trial of Mr. Roberto Alonzo Mendoza, charged with the following crimes: kidnapping and abandonment of minors, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, endangering human lives. Prosecutor Elena Varela, you may proceed. Elena stepped forward, her movement slow but heavy like a tremor. Your Honor, today we are not merely trying a father, we are measuring the moral compass that governs human decency between power and the fragile lives of 2 children. A screen lit up, displaying a line from Alonzo's journal photographed secretly by Maria. They must be removed before the board meeting. Lucia is no longer a threat, but the children are what stand in the way of my re-election. The room stirred. The judge tapped gently to restore order. Elena continued, "We have the testimony of Maria Hernandez, who saw those words with her own eyes and chose to speak up even knowing the price of betraying power. We have Domingo, the man who rescued those children from the forest, who understands the truth behind a father's absence. And finally, we have the mother silenced for 4 years, erased from her children's lives as if she never existed." Lucia stood as her name was called. She walked to the witness stand, not once glancing at Alonzo. "I am not here for revenge," she began, her voice unwavering. "I am here to affirm that motherhood cannot be erased by power, money, or fear." The judge nodded. In the gallery, a few onlookers squeezed each other's hands. In a quiet corner, one silent figure sat, observing. Bastioneers alert, eyes tracking each person as if he understood right from wrong. Maria took the stand next, her step slow, hand shaking, but her voice was steady. "I used to believe Mr. Alonzo had his reasons until I saw that handwriting and the eyes of those children in the forest. I knew then silence is complicity." Domingo was last. He said only one sentence. "I've seen enemies, deserters, and cruelty, but I've never seen a father abandon his children like it was a reasonable choice." Alonzo said nothing throughout. When given a chance to speak, he only bowed his head. No justifications, no deflection. Just the stifled silence of a man who knew this time he had lost. The judge declared, "The trial will continue tomorrow for deliberation and sentencing. Court is adjourned." Bang of the gavel. End of day one. Lucia stepped into the hallway. Her sons waited. Tiago held her hand. Matias ran to Bastion and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. No words, just eyes and embraces. Day 2 of trial. No rain today, but the wind howled as if nature itself held its breath. Inside, all eyes focused on the accused Alonzo Mendoza, once the titan of the national financial market, now sat quiet in the defendant's chair, his once crisp white collar wrinkled from wear. The jury had heard everything. The defense made little effort because there was no defense. The evidence was real. The testimony was real. And the children still alive, still capable of love, were irrefutable proof that no argument could erase. The judge was preparing to close proceedings. Suddenly, a small hand rose in the gallery. All heads turned. It was Tiago, only 4.5 years old, his hair neatly trimmed, wearing a white shirt freshly ironed by Lucia the night before. The judge paused, slightly surprised, and leaned forward. "You wish to say something, young man?" Lucia almost intervened, but Tiago's eyes stopped her. Eyes full of resolve, not anger, just searching. He stepped into the center of the room, usually reserved for witnesses. His voice rang out pure, trembling slightly. "I only have one question." The room stilled. "Dad." He turned to Alonzo. "Did you ever love us?" Time froze, not out of shock, but because the question was so raw, so real, no one dared breathe. Elena lifted her eyes from her files. Domingo's hands clenched on his knees. Maria lowered her gaze, unable to face the past. Lucia didn't blink. She didn't want to miss a single second. Alonzo looked at his son. For the first time, his eyes didn't flinch. No longer the gaze of a businessman, a manipulator, or a failed father. Just a man exposed facing a child who had asked the one question with no escape. Nearly a full minute passed. He didn't speak. His lips trembled, his hands clenched, then released. Finally, he lowered his head, not in defeat by the law, but because he didn't know the answer himself. Tiago looked at his father, then nodded, as if he understood. He turned away. No need for more. The judge struck the gavel softly. Court recess for deliberation. Verdict will be announced tomorrow morning. Outside, Domingo placed a hand on Tiago's shoulder. "You okay, kid?" The boy nodded quietly. "I'm not sad. I just wanted to know the truth." Bastion followed behind, never taking his eyes off the boy. In the fading afternoon light, filtering through the courthouse windows, their shadows merged like that moment in the forest. A lost child and a nameless warrior who chose to stay. The morning of the verdict. Gentle breeze. Sunlight draped the courthouse steps like golden threads. The air hung still, as if even time entered the room with caution. The courtroom was full again, but this time the stares were no longer fierce, only quiet anticipation. No one wished for vengeance. They hoped for a justice that was simply just enough. The judge held the ruling in hand, enunciating each word. Based on witness testimony, material evidence, and the defendant Roberto Alonzo Mendoza's actions, the court rules. The defendant is sentenced to 20 years in prison for child endangerment, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. However, in light of his biological relation to the victims, the court grants the children the right to choose, upon reaching adulthood, whether they wish to see their father. This right shall not be imposed. The room remained still, no applause, no outcry, because this was a sentence neither harsh nor lenient, but deep, enough to make a man realize some losses are beyond return. Alonzo didn't cry, didn't protest. He bowed his head for the second time. But this time it was for the rest of his life. Lucia sat still, not triumphant. She looked at Tiago, the boy who had asked the one question that forced the court to feel. She placed a hand on his head, saying nothing. As the police escorted Alonzo through the central aisle, he glanced back. The children didn't look, but Bastion did. The dog stood in the hallway, eyes calm as ever. No hatred, no scorn. Just the gaze of one who had witnessed everything and chosen to stand on the side of life. The judge called out one final announcement. Before the court adjourns, we have one special statement. Elena stepped forward, holding a thick file. She opened it, voice ringing clear. Upon review of archived records, K9 data, and special unit reports, we confirm the German Shepherd known as Bastion, formerly K9-271, was a member of the Rapid Response Rescue Team, presumed dead during a 2020 mission. For his irreplaceable role in protecting two young witnesses, assisting in survival and search efforts under extreme conditions, the court declares, Bastion is hereby recognized as a catalyst of justice and shall be recorded permanently in the city's honorary registry. Everyone stood. This time, they couldn't hold back the applause, not for a dog, but for a soul that chose not to stay silent, chose not to abandon its instincts. Bastion made no gesture. He simply walked beside the two children, sat down. Matthias patted his head gently, whispering as if to an adult, "You don't need a medal. We already know you're our hero." The court closed. Justice didn't come through fury that day. It came through a child's question, through the eyes of a dog, and through the silence of a father who was late but still allowed to witness one final chance, to be forgiven when the child is willing. There was no applause in the courtroom. No one stood up to cheer, only Tiago, with his tiny hand gripping his mother's finger, and Matthias looking over at Bastion, smiling softly, as if to ask, "We did the right thing, didn't we?" Some verdicts are never written in legal records. Some justice doesn't need gavels or formal declarations. It's spoken in a trembling mama on the first morning back home. It's seen in Pedro's eyes, watching his father being led away, not with anger, but with quiet acceptance, like a final farewell to the past, to make space for the future. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about justice isn't punishment, but the moment someone chooses to take responsibility so that others can move forward without bitterness. Because deep within every child who has been abandoned, there remains a small corner of the heart that wants to believe. My father once loved me, even if it was in the wrong way, even if it was love wrapped in fear or selfishness, but still love. And deep within every person who's done wrong, there's a part that longs to say sorry, to turn back just once, even if it feels too late. But sometimes all it takes is a single question, a single dog standing before the court, silent and unwavering like a witness to what truly matters. And just like that, every door can open again, not to forget, but to forgive. 9 months after the trial. The early summer sun lit up the narrow street on the edge of town. The trees shimmered in full green, cicadas sang lazily. It was a morning like any other, but for Lucia and her 2 boys it marked a new beginning, a life without fear. Their small apartment sat in a pale yellow 3-story building. A white wooden fence framed the tiny yard, just enough room for a table and chairs, a few lavender pots, and a single hammock. Not far off was the red-tiled roof of Domingo's house, the place that once gave them shelter after the darkest night. Lucia stood by the window, drying a cup of tea, her eyes calm as she watched Tiago and Matias skip down the steps, backpacks bouncing, voices bubbling with talk of school. Behind them, Bastion followed, unhurried, never too close, but never far. Lucia now received special financial assistance under a combined witness protection and social support program. She wasn't wealthy, but it was enough. Enough to raise her boys and, as she often joked with Domingo, enough to buy sausages for a 4-legged bodyguard with a conscience. Mornings in town always felt warm. The neighbor, Mrs. Elvira, greeted Lucia with the soft clink of a spoon on porcelain from her balcony. The mechanic at the corner would sneak Matias a piece of candy whenever he walked home from school. And the kindergarten teacher, Miss Inez, would often remark, "These 2 have sharper instincts than most kids their age, like they've learned something from someone very patient." Lucia only smiled. She never said that the one who taught her sons didn't speak human words, but spoke through eyes and silent nights curled beside them during storms. Tiago and Matias were making friends, still shy, but slowly blending in, learning to play soccer, draw, laugh out loud at silly jokes. But every time Matias got shoved at recess, Tiago didn't lash out. He simply turned his head toward the gate, and there, behind the bars, sat Bastion. He didn't bark. He didn't move forward. He just watched, silent but certain as if to say, "I'm here." Domingo still visited every Saturday evening. He'd bring a few potatoes, some tomatoes, and a warm smile. "The kids are getting a little cheeky," he'd chuckle. "That's a good sign." "Yes," Lucia would reply, pouring his tea. Bastion would lie just outside, eyes half closed as if asleep, but ears always alert. A piece of the house now, a part of them. Lucia had started working part-time at the town library. She cared for the kids during the day, and at night she read and took notes. No more menacing stares, no strange phone calls, just the sound of pages turning and 2 boys arguing over who could draw Bastion better. One afternoon, Matias ran in waving a picture. "Mom, I drew Bastion, but I don't know what color to make his eyes." Lucia knelt beside him. "You don't need to color them," she said gently. "His eyes aren't for seeing, they're for feeling." That evening scene, the 3 of them sat on the porch eating pasta. Bastion lay beside them, head resting on Tiago's leg. No dramatic music, no grand speeches, just the clink of forks, the rustle of wind through the roof, and the steady beat of hearts relearning how to trust. That, after all, life was still waiting. Saturday evening, the little kitchen buzzed with the smell of fried garlic, the bubbling of soup, and 2 boys bickering over a carrot. "That piece was mine first," Matias protested. "No, I peeled it." Tiago fired back. Lucia turned from the stove, spoon in hand, smiling. "All right. Whoever wants to peel carrots better, go wash up so I can fry the eggs." The boys looked at each other, then sprinted to the sink. Laughter rose softly through the house, a sound this home had waited a long time to hear. Bastien lay just outside the kitchen door. His head rested on his paws, eyes half shut. But his ears still followed the children's giggles, the clatter of knives on the cutting board. Each time Lucia passed by, he opened his eyes for just a second, then closed them again, as if to confirm, everything's fine now. No need to stand guard, but I'm still here. Their modest kitchen, a small fridge with crayon drawings stuck to it, tiles stained with water spots, a jar of wildflowers Domingo had brought the week before, and in the middle of it all, a fragile life, quietly growing. Lucia stirred the soup again. "Tiago, come taste this." He ran over, took a spoonful, nodded. "Tastes like Domingo's house," Matias added, "but missing sausage." The three burst out laughing. Lucia shook her head. "This isn't a restaurant, you know." Behind them, Bastion sniffed, seemingly in agreement, but also, perhaps, to remind her the kid wasn't wrong. After dinner, they all sat on the living room floor, a new routine. Lucia cleared the table. Tiago lay reading picture books. Matias grabbed his coloring box and started sketching. "Mom, I'm drawing Bastion." Lucia leaned over. On the paper was a big dog ears up, deep eyes, gray-brown coat. But what made her pause was the little police cap drawn atop his head. "You remember he was a police dog?" she asked. Matias nodded eagerly. "Because nobody comes near when he sits still. And he listens without talking, just like the officers in our class videos." Lucia looked from her son to Bastion. The dog didn't move, but his eyes opened slightly, and something in them reached out to that drawing. No one said it aloud, but they all knew. Every scar on Bastion's body told of a past that never let go. And his presence now wasn't an order. It was a choice made by the heart. Evening fell. Domingo stopped by with a bag of oranges and some cookies. "What's cooking today? Smells amazing," he chuckled. Lucia poured tea. Tiago showed off his drawing. Matias held up a misshapen but adorable carrot man. Domingo sat, handed the boys each an orange, then gently patted Bastion's head. "Some folks don't believe in miracles," he said, "but sometimes miracles don't arrive with a bang. They arrive by staying." Night came. Lucia tucked her boys in, kissed their foreheads. Before turning out the light, Matias whispered, "Mom, I think Bastion understands everything." Lucia raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and how do you know that?" "Because I whispered yesterday that I was scared of thunder. And last night, he slept right by my door." In the quiet of the night, out on the porch, Bastion lifted his head toward the moon, not to guard, just to make sure the light was still there. And for the first time, peace wasn't just a moment. It was a state of being. With labored breaths, he still lifted his head every time a child's voice called his name. With clouded eyes, he kept watch on every small step taken in the yard, with a faint but determined bark whenever someone knocked at the door, as if to say, "I'm still here." And in the quiet moments when the family gathered close, he didn't need to push in, didn't need to beg for attention, because he knew he was already part of the rhythm of their hearts. An irreplaceable presence. Bastion never needed a glorious ending. He didn't leave amid sobs, nor did he fade beneath medals and funeral bugles. Instead, he chose to live and to stay, for as long as he could, to watch two children grow, to see the mother who once despaired now laugh more brightly than ever, to witness the house that was once so cold, now filled with giggles and the smell of baked cookies. And then one day, when he gently closed his eyes for the final time, it would be within the arms of the very family he had chosen. No one mourned for long, because they understood. Bastion wasn't gone. He had simply changed the way he stayed. He stayed in the framed picture on the wall, wearing a little police hat. He stayed in the childhood memories of two boys, that once there was a hero who couldn't speak, but loved them more than life itself. He stayed in every breath of that house, where he once stood guard through that first winter night. There was no need for farewells, no need for goodbyes, because those who truly stay, stay forever, in the heart, in a love that time can never erase. The birthday arrived like early summer sunlight after a long, relentless rain. There were no dazzling fireworks, no grand banquet hall, but there was something warmer than all of that eyes. The eyes of a small-town community who had quietly witnessed the first days when two little boys were wrapped in the arms of Bastion like baby birds finally finding a nest. And today, those very people folded invitations, hung balloons, and prepared the cake not out of duty, but out of love. The backyard of Domingo's house, once quiet beneath the forest's shadow, now echoed with laughter. A tarp was spread out across the grass, wooden benches arranged in a circle, strings of tiny flags stretched from tree branches to the balcony rail. Matias and Tiago wore white shirts embroidered with their names on the chest. The two boys ran around, eyes shining, clutching a bright blue plastic ball. For the first time in their lives, they understood what my birthday truly meant. Lucia bustled about, but her eyes could not hide their joy. She set sweets on plates, straightened the ribbon that had slipped off the cake, and wiped frosting from Matia's nose. Domingo wore his green striped shirt, the one he only put on for special occasions. Quietly, he adjusted the chairs, then stood at the edge of the yard, eyes glistening, and in the middle of it all, Bastion stood. He had recovered. His coat was shinier, his eyes clearer. But what moved everyone wasn't his appearance. It was the small round medal that sparkled on his collar, personally sent by the captain of his former K-9 unit. Honorary guardian for keeping a family whole. Not a trophy, but a recognition. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew today belonged to Tiago and Matias. But this day would not exist if the dog standing there hadn't once stood against the storm. When the birthday cake was brought out, everyone sang. The two boys closed their eyes and clasped their hands. A breeze swept beneath the tarp, making the candle flames tremble. Lucia stood behind her sons. Bastion sat on their right side. Matias whispered, "I wish Bastion never leaves." Tiago added, "And I wish everyone here knew that we were born again because of him." The wind blew out the candles, but no one looked at the cake. All eyes turned to the dog, his head lifted, eyes shining like a clear sky. Laughter filled the yard. Kids lined up to take photos with Bastion. One child even hugged him tightly and whispered, "I always wished I had a dog like this." Domingo, who had been standing by the apple tree the entire time, quickly wiped something glistening from his eye. He turned away, trying not to be noticed, but Lucia had already stepped up and gently took his hand. "It's the first time I've seen them laugh, without hiding their fear." Domingo nodded, his voice husky. "And the first time in years, I feel like there's still room in this world for kindness." As the sun dipped lower, people began to leave. Matthias clutched a small gift box. Tiago held tightly to a drawing he'd made for Bastion, a card that read, "Family is where someone stays even when they could walk away." Bastion didn't need to read it, but when Lucia read it aloud, he wagged his tail slowly but firmly, just like he always did, quietly yet unmistakably. That night, Lucia laid out blankets so they could sleep on the porch, under the stars. She lay in the middle, Bastion beside Matthias. The night was calm, the breeze soft. Tiago turned his head and whispered, "Mama, if we grow up someday, I still want to celebrate with him." Lucia pulled him close and replied, "As long as your hearts remember, he'll never go anywhere." The party had ended. Ribbons still clung to tree branches, swaying gently in the wind. On the table, only crumbs remained from the cake, and in the fading light, Matthias wandered around, picking up scattered toys. Lucia, cleaning dishes in the kitchen, glanced now and then at the yard where Bastion still sat, eyes following Matthias's every step, as if waiting for a special moment that only he understood. Then Matthias stopped. He bent down, watching as Bastion approached, but this time the dog didn't wag his tail as usual. He didn't bark softly. He didn't nuzzle. Instead, he gently picked something out of an old basket in the corner of the porch, something no one had noticed in weeks. A small chew ball worn and covered in old teeth marks. Matthias's eyes widened. He recognized it instantly. It was the very first toy he ever held after being rescued from the forest. When that big dog had curled beside him, shielding him from the wind for the first time in his life. That ball, it had once been a silent comfort. Bastion stepped closer and set the ball down, not dropped, not tossed, but placed it with care, deliberately, slowly, then sat down, head slightly bowed. No one needed to explain it. No one needed to speak. No one needed to interpret. Matthias dropped to his knees, hugging the ball like embracing a living memory. His eyes welled up. Tiago came up behind, taking his brother's hand. Lucia stood at the doorway, still holding a dish towel. Domingo was at the door, saying nothing, but his eyes, too, were red. No one asked Bastion a thing, because they all understood this was his final confirmation. I chose you. From that very first moment in the forest, when darkness was our only companion and survival was still a question, I chose to stay, not because of instinct, but because of heart. Matthias whispered, "He remembers this ball." Lucia nodded, sat beside him, and placed a hand on his shoulder, "And he remembers why he found you." The air went still like a quiet lake. Even the breeze paused. Bastion just sat there, eyes gently closed, his back upright like a statue. But the muscles in his neck trembled slightly, as if each breath carried a wave of memory. Then he stood up and quietly returned to his familiar spot on the mat by the porch. He said nothing. Didn't ask for the ball back. Didn't look back. Because he knew the gift wasn't meant to be played with. It was meant to be remembered. To remember that once there was a dog who found his purpose not in barracks, not under command, but beside two small children in a forest that once felt like the end of the world. Matthias clutched the ball to his chest. He said nothing more. Only much later, when Lucia tucked them in, did he whisper, "Mama, I think Bastion knows we understand now." Lucia brushed the hair from his forehead. "Understand what, sweetheart?" "That we're not lost kids anymore, and he's not a lost dog anymore either." The sun melted behind the mountain ridge. painting the sky in honeyed gold. The wooden porch at Domingo's house, once a shelter for a mother and her boys, had become a gathering place each afternoon, a space where few words were needed, just the act of being there. Lucia leaned against a wooden beam, gently spinning her warm cup of tea. Tiago rested his head in her lap, eyes closed. Matias folded up a small sheet of paper. It was his latest drawing, a little house with a red roof, a tree to the left, and in the center, a large dog standing guard at the door. Bastion lay in the yard, head on his front paws, eyes half closed in rest, but ears twitching at every sound. Though his duty had ended, the instinct to protect still hummed inside him like background music. A soft breeze stirred. The golden hour painted his coat in warm hues, making the gray-black fur shimmer like sunlight woven into shadow. Pedro, now more confident, braver, whispered while staring at the dog, "We are a family, with Mama, with Domingo, and with Bastion." Lucia turned her head, but said nothing. She only squeezed her son's hand. No need to correct. No need to add anyone else. It was enough love, enough wholeness, enough to never feel lacking again. Domingo, watering plants nearby, glanced over and smiled, a glimmer in his eye like contentment. What was once an empty house was now a home, not because of paperwork or blood, but because of wounds that had been mended, memories once painful that now felt warm. They never spoke of the past as a scar, but as a milestone from which they restarted and found one another. Bastion shifted, changed his position, and laid himself down between the two boys, just as he did during those first chaotic nights. Tiago swung a leg across his back. Matias curled against his belly like the softest, safest pillow in the world. Bastion breathed slow, not guarded, not alert. For the first time in years, he truly relaxed. Above them, dusk crept in, leaving behind the faintest indigo at the edge of the sky. Birdsong retreated to nests. The wind whispered a closing lullaby. No sirens, no dramatic end, just a still frame for people, one dog, and a wooden porch glowing in sunset light. A story that seemed to begin with abandonment, but in truth was always a journey of return. To the instinct to love, to the feeling of being chosen, to the simplest, hardest thing to hold on to, peace. The ending wasn't goodbye, it was a promise to stay even without words. Because some kinds of love don't arrive with promises, don't need signatures on paper and ink. All it takes is a silent gaze shared between two souls. And that's enough to understand. From now on, no one gets left behind. Bastion lay quietly between the two boys, breathing steady, eyes gently closed as if dreaming, but not of war zones, not of sirens blaring from training camps. This was a peaceful dream, one where he no longer needed to be a soldier, just a part of a family portrait, a place to lean, a heartbeat to match. From deep within the forest, where it once seemed a life might end, became the very place where three wounded hearts would begin to heal together. None of them were perfect, none without mistakes, but that's exactly why they belonged. Not by blood, but by a choice made between pain and forgiveness. The sun dipped behind the hills. The little house dimmed into twilight. Children's laughter drifted on the breeze, and Bastion, still lying there between the boys, was a quiet reminder, I cannot speak, but I will stay until the very end. And just like that, one story comes to a close. But love, it keeps writing its next chapter in other homes, among those who once thought they had lost everything, only to find one another again because of a dog. Some stories don't need a grand finale, no triumphant flags, no heroes standing tall in victory. Sometimes all it takes is a silent presence, a deep gaze, and a steady breath between two children. Bastion's story isn't just a tale of protection. It's a quiet reminder to the world. Some heroes don't wear armor or carry guns. They walk on four legs, with a loyal heart and eyes that understand. Among countless breeds, the German Shepherd has long been known as the warrior of loyalty and intelligence. But Bastion wasn't some gleaming symbol. He didn't need a medal to be loved. He just needed a family. And when he found two children lost in the forest, that moment awakened something long asleep since his days in the military. Not because of a command, but because of the heart. Some acts don't come from training. They don't come from commands. They come from something deeper. The innate kindness that nature placed within dogs, a silent gift to humankind. Tiago and Mattia survived not just because Bastion stood guard, but because he gave them something greater. The belief that even if they'd been left behind, they were still worth choosing. And in return, Bastion, a dog who had lost his purpose after the death of his partner, found something no trainer could ever teach. That love doesn't need conditioning. It only needs to be given and received. A dog saved two children. But in truth, the children saved him too. They saved him from loneliness, from a painful past, from the fear of not belonging anywhere. When Lucia wrapped her arms around her boys again, when Domingo quietly wiped away tears, when the whole village came together to throw a fifth birthday party for the kids, it became clear a family doesn't need to be picture perfect. It only needs enough love. And it needs one soul, even one who cannot speak, willing to give everything as if we were their whole world. Family isn't always where we're born. It's where someone stays up at night to protect us when we're afraid. It's where a dog lies between two children and refuses to leave, not even for a second. It's where the past isn't erased, but forgiven, thanks to the rebirth of kindness. In a world that rushes, where goodness is doubted and loyalty is sometimes mocked as naivety, Bastion's story gives us a rare pause to ask ourselves, when was the last time we looked into a dog's eyes and felt peace? When was the last time we chose to protect someone weaker without needing a reason? We don't need to be heroes, but we can be someone's shelter, even just once. And sometimes that shelter comes from a dog once forgotten. Life is a gift, but love is what makes it worth anything at all. Being abandoned does not mean being worthless, because all it takes is one look at the right moment, and every life is worth saving. Dogs, especially German Shepherds, are not just pets. They are silent witnesses, the last friend on a battlefield, heroes who never ask for glory. If you have a dog look a little longer, sit beside them for a moment. Listen, not with your ears, but with your heart, because we may have thousands of acquaintances, but to that dog, you are the only one. Bastion is not just a dog in this story, he's a symbol, a bridge between loss and healing, between the past and the present, between pain and hope. And if you're reading these words, don't leave with dry eyes. Carry just one small thing with you, something that might change a life out there. Choose love before the world forgets how, because sometimes a quiet companion, a gentle gaze, and an old tennis ball are all it takes to define a lifetime.